this Effen show. It is this Effen show. It is this Effen show.
Welcome to This Effen Show,
a podcast by two trans men of a certain age.
Welcome back to This Effen Show with me, your Uncle Drew, that guy.
And me, trans dad, Spencer. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of struggles that men have and the sort of additional barriers or difficulties that trans men might have around the same kinds of issues. And this got prompted by just sort of paying attention to what people have been talking about online over the last couple of weeks and things that we've noticed ourselves about how challenging it can be to express wants, needs, and desires as a man without being diminished, I guess, right?
Yeah, dismissed or, diminished. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just sort of the idea that, there's all these expectations that are placed on men, and we don't really talk about those very much, and how those expectations limit the ways in which men get to participate in both society and in relationships. And then sort of the added difficulty, I think, for us sometimes gets to be being cast in the same mold as cis men, as if we don't have maybe a greater connection to or aptitude for emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I think there's even a reluctancy on men of all flavors to talk about struggling, and I get it, right? Like, patriarchy is the base of a lot of problems. Men cause a lot of trouble, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't get to talk about how to be better, right? We don't get to talk about, okay, we cause a lot of problems. It's not the end of the sentence. That should be the beginning of the sentence, right?
Right.
So let's take care of ourselves and each other, right?
Yeah, but it ends up being like that's the end, right?
Yeah, we don't get to talk about it.
Like, you're not supposed to be able to say, well, okay, we can do better.
Yeah. Yesterday, an example. Yesterday was my birthday. I am now 51 years old, and I know with absolute certainty that at no time before yesterday did I ever think, one day I will be 51 years old. And so I got to yesterday and I was like, wow, I didn't think about this. I don't even know how I feel about it. I don't even know what it means. And what struck me the most is after that thought, I said, I don't even know what to do with these feelings. Like, I don't know how to help myself. I don't know who to reach out to, right? It wasn't a huge dark space, but it was an emotional challenge. It got in my head a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're just not, we just don't have a built-in, I mean, I don't think we have a built-in understanding of where to go to get help. We don't have that kind of sisterhood that I think I see in women's communities, where we just don't lean on each other.
Yeah.
For all those fears that, you need to man up and take care of your own shit.
Yeah. Well, there's that. And then I think there's the added pressure of, at least for me, feeling like I should be in a certain place in my career, in my financial stability, in my evolution as a person, just based on, I'm 60, so I think about like, where was my dad when he was 60? And I am failing if I compare myself to certain metrics about my dad, right? Like, I'm not at the top of my career. I'm not, in fact, I've completely changed careers instead. Um, I am not financially as stable as my parents were. And I can look objectively at the things that I've accomplished in my life and I can say, oh, you know what? You're actually pretty successful at a lot of things. You've helped create important changes for trans and queer people worldwide.
Yeah. Yes.
You have a certain amount of recognition. And at the same time, I still feel like I am so far behind my peers, my male peers, guys that I went to law school with,
Mhm.
or just generally men out in the world that I see that are in my age group. And I just feel really far behind. But who do we talk to about that?
Yeah. Yeah, and how much of that is specifically trans related, right? And it's not a theory that some of us in the alphabet mafia are behind cis peers, right? I mean, there's
Yeah,
studies that show levels of accomplishment, levels of understanding around financial literacy, right? We tend to come in behind our cis peers.
right.
So, my mind first goes to, well, how was your dad really happy with his career that he had? Was he a happy man? He may have all of these
My
accomplishments.
dad, I think he really liked what he did for a living. I think he liked his work. He was somebody who, like me, had clinical depression, but he never bothered to get any help for it.
Hmm.
He never saw a therapist. He never got medicated. Um, so in that sense, I think he wasn't as happy as I am. But, my parents had a lot of friends. He did a lot of things that he absolutely loved doing. He loved to sail, so he had buddies that he went sailing with um, frequently. He did a lot of stuff and and activities that he enjoyed, and certainly the amount of money that he made those things possible.
Yeah. But not dealing with your depression, is a hallmark of a man of a certain time in history, right? Your dad was an immigrant and
Right.
from a culture that doesn't really talk about emotions too much. Am I
Oh, in Sweden, God, no, we don't talk about
okay?
emotions there.
So we don't talk about emotions. We don't deal with our sadness. We just power through,
Yep.
right? So I don't know, and I don't know your dad, and I don't want to tell you what to do. I just would. My thought is when we compare all of these benchmarks as indications of success, that's a lot of what did he have, what did he do,
Right.
how did he feel. You may be
Yeah.
so much more in touch with your emotions and know who you are more than he did. I don't know. Don't forget to add those
Yeah.
benchmarks.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I feel like out of sort of the stereotypes of cishet men, my dad was pretty in touch with his emotions. He was a pretty weepy guy. He was very sentimental about things. Uh, and you know, I, he just my parents really got afforded a lot of material success in life and also success with friends. Like, my mom has friends that they've been friends since they were 5 years old, and they're all like 89, 90 years old now.
Whoa.
Um, and I think about, for us, I don't know about you, but who's the longest term friend that you have?
I'm I could pick up the phone right now and call a friend from high school, but we don't keep in daily contact, you know?
Yeah.
But she's there. Um, I have a buddy from my late 20s, and again, we don't keep in daily contact, but I know they're there. So, like, close friend that I'm like talk to all the time, probably oldest friend is about 17 years.
I think for me, I mean, there's still a couple people from law school that I don't really stay in touch with them, but like we follow each other on Twitter.
Yeah.
So I don't think that really counts. Um,
My Twitter friend.
so probably the longest term friendships I have are folks from queer leather communities, and that might be 35, 36 years.
That's impressive.
Um, but of those people that I've known that long, maybe 3 or 4 of them are people that I feel like I could just call up and say, "Hey, I need some support around something. Can I talk to you about something?"
Yeah.
I have probably more people like that in my life that I've known for, say, 10-ish years.
Okay.
Um, but it's interesting, like, are the people that we as trans men retain in our lives people that we knew before transition, or is it mostly people post transition?
Yes, yeah. And do I have male friends that I feel I could call up and say I'm struggling, right? Or do I? It's mostly women friends that I feel like I could call up and say I'm struggling. I don't, you know. I think you and I have talked, and I've brought to you where I'm like, it's rough right now. um,
Yeah.
but outside of you, it's why don't I have more men friends that I feel safe that I can say I'm struggling and not worry about losing their respect, which is horseshit, right? But there it is. I mean, that's for me. That's the thing: is can I still feel like a man and say, man, it's rough right now. I
Yeah.
feel lost. Um,
I wonder how much of that feeling, right? That sense of I can't let the mask go to talk to other men who might actually have more understanding of whatever the struggle is that I'm having, but I'm not willing to let the mask go to talk to other men
yeah,
about this struggle that I'm having, which seems really related to being a man.
yeah, yeah. And then furthermore, let me step aside for a second. This crap that we have to deal with, that we're not authentic men, that we're not real men. I ain't got no time for that, obviously,
No.
on 1,000 reasons. And in the middle of those 1,000 reasons is the struggles that I'm having aren't to do with being trans, right? Like I'm cool. Like trans is not a problem.
Yeah.
The struggles I'm having are feeling like it's just being a man, right? So don't tell me that we aren't just as authentic as cis men, because
Right.
we're struggling with the same things. What does it mean to be a man? How do I feel about being a man? What are my needs as a man, right? So
Right.
that's the only trans specific thing that comes up, is like, oh, and now I have to deal with people thinking that I don't really know what it's like to be male, when my struggles are all around what does it mean to be a man? Can I
Well,
be?
and particularly a man of a certain age.
Yeah, yeah. And the comparing
You
thing, I
know,
think we all do it. So
right? And I, at least for both of us, kind of being at this point in our lives and reimagining our careers also means that we are reliant on our partners in a way that we hadn't expected.
yeah,
maybe at this point in our lives. And so there's that whole like, I'm not providing for my family, or I'm not performing at the level that I should be performing.
Yeah. I'm sure when I asked Gina to marry me, if I had said, oh, and in about 14 years, I'm going to completely pivot away from the career I have and and go somewhere else, right? Like that would have been awkward. And yet here we are. I completely walked away from a career and am pivoting and have to rely on her more than I wanted to. And all of that garbage starts whispering in your ear, right? All of
Yeah,
that. You gotta make the money. You gotta support your family. You gotta be a man. All of that BS gets loud.
it gets really loud.
Yeah.
And then the part that I think that's really kind of more trans specific is I look around at the vast numbers of trans men that I know, which is sizable, or the people that I follow online or whatever. And the one of the more common themes that I see is people really struggling with either finding a job, finding a career, finding something that is meaningful to them. And as we age, there's also this whole pressure around, will I ever be able to retire? I can't tell you the number of people, and that doesn't seem to necessarily be a trans specific thing per se, but more of a queer thing,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
is, oh my gosh, here I am. I'm getting close to retirement age, but I'll never be able to retire.
Yeah. 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 And then add into that, I think there's a collective consciousness of suspicion around institutions that could help, right? That
Right.
as a trans
Yeah.
person, are you going to be am I going to be safe with you talking about financial planning
Right.
if I have to out myself for other things, right? And it's a suspicion that goes to all institutions that could help you, financial institutions, mental health. Am I going to find a mental health practitioner who is not just okay with it, but is affirming? And am I going to find a doctor who is okay, right? So that's
Right.
where the extra barriers come in. Is
Right. And then you add in layers on top of that, like, oh, well, and I'm kinky, and I'm poly, and I'm,
yeah,
all of these other things. How well versed are these professionals going to be in those issues? Are they going to be um, biased against any of those things, or are they going to be supportive? And that adds in this whole other stress level of, well, now there really is nobody to talk to.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, we bought this house, and I used the VA home loan, which means I had to bring up my military service, which was obviously
Right.
under a different name and a different gender marker, right? The anxiety
Right.
around that caused me to put off house hunting for so long because I didn't want to deal with anybody's garbage bigotry about
Right.
finding a realtor or finding a loan person, right? And I put it off
Right.
because I just didn't
Yeah.
want to. I didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that
And I'm guessing that happens for a lot of people because they're worried about their dead name showing up on their credit report.
yeah, and it's a total bummer. Right? Like, I don't want to make light of it, but it's a
Yes.
huge bummer to be like, oh, I could do this really awesome thing, but there's this barrier that I have to get over,
Right.
and and the thing is, we found a realtor she's awesome. And our loan officer was like, I don't care. You're not the first trans person I processed, right? So it turned out okay.
Right.
It turned out okay. But the history I've had with accessing institutional help caused me to be pretty bummed for a while
Yeah.
about it, So, and didn't even tell my wife, didn't tell anybody that I was dealing with this. This is the first time I've actually admitted it, that I put off house hunting because I was worried about this. So these are the things
Yeah.
that we deal with. And
And you and I are, we sit in really privileged positions as being white men who are well educated in traditional education, academia, who live on the West Coast in, metropolitan areas where there are higher populations of trans people and more exposure of who trans people are. I think about friends of mine who live in more rural areas or are BIPOC or people with, I have a friend in your town who has severe disability. And so that limits what his options are because even if he wanted to work, he can only work up to a certain dollar amount or he loses his Social Security disability benefit.
Damn.
And so, you know, that adds an extra layer of stress onto his life in terms of what his options are. The things that you and I have gone through um, that are sort of trans specific are kind of a cakewalk for a lot of other people who haven't had the same opportunities, maybe,
Yeah.
or who live in places where there's just not a lot of knowledge of who trans people are.
Yeah. Yeah. I've lived in California for most of my life, adult life now, with a few stops in Washington State. And I've had terrible interactions with doctors. I mean, just awful, right? Just,
Yeah.
I think of the medical, and I'll call this out. If you were in the medical staff at San Jose State University between 2008 and 2010, you failed galactically. You failed, and you are a university in the state of California. You absolutely failed. But I had other options. I just was like, fine, I'll drive to the Santa Cruz Planned Parenthood and get excellent care. Right. If I had stayed in Wichita, Kansas, I would have had probably a bigger struggle, I'm assuming. So, but I also don't want to discount my struggle within my privilege. Right? Do I have it? Do I have it pretty good? I do. But
Did it still suck? Yes.
it just still sounds. Yeah. Could it suck worse?
Yeah,
Always.
it fucking
Right?
sucked. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just a reminder, you're listening to This Effen Show, and we hope you'll follow us on Instagram and or YouTube. And you can find that at This Effen Show. It's pretty easy. But let's continue on with our conversation.
Yes. This is really uplifting shit right here. Isn't
it though? I'll tell you what.
This is some glitter and rainbows.
Okay, so on the flip side of of the struggles of manliness as a trans man, let's talk about the other really awesome thing, which is we look younger than our cis male counterparts.
I look good. You look good.
We look very good.
Yeah.
Do you ever go out like to the grocery store or the hardware store or whatever, and you look around at other men that are around your age or that you think might be around your age, and you think, my God, what has happened to you in your life that you look so awful?
Or people, when they find out my age, they're like, what, you look so much younger than that. And if I don't know them, then I'll say, well, I don't have any kids, right? Because God bless parents, but that shit ages you, and so I don't have any kids. But if I
Where do
know
you think
them,
all these gray hairs came from?
It's just one kid. Right? But if I know them and I know they're trans, and I always say, they're like, "Oh, you look so young." I'm like, "Yeah, my people don't age." Right? Like,
That's right.
We look good. We look good for a long
We do.
time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Now it's kind of a downside, I think, for some of the younger guys when they start transition and then they look like they're 14.
Yes.
It's hard to be taken seriously, right?
Yes, and some of our fellows.
But I wonder if that doesn't contribute to the whole feeling like we're so far behind cis male peers.
Yeah. Yeah. was gonna say some of our fellas are below average height for what our culture has said a man's height should be, right? And we look good. We look good, right? So
Yeah.
is that hard to deal with, to not be taken seriously, and then is that a trap to fall in, and then contributes to feeling like you're behind? Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
Or maybe, who knows? Maybe it does limit career advancement.
Yeah. To not be taken seriously because you're too young, to not be taken seriously because you're too old or look too old.
Right. Yeah. It actually reminds me of, so I used to do a workshop at various trans conferences on dressing well, and and working on your personal style so that you're presenting the way that you want to present. And so I was doing this at a True Spirit conference in Washington D.C. one year, and I had this guy sitting in the front row who came in wearing like Vans and some skater shorts and a t-shirt, and he sat down in the front row, and he sat, with his butt like on the edge of the seat and leaning back and doing a
Casual.
big man spread. And he was all of maybe 5 feet and 95 pounds dripping wet.
Mm-hmm.
And about halfway into the class, he raises his hand, and I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And he says, "Well, like, dude, like, I'm trying to figure out like how to be taken more seriously at work. Like, I want to be able to advance in my job, but like that doesn't seem to be happening." And so I was like, "Okay, well, where do you work?" He's like, "Well, I work in a bank," and and I'm like, so I looked at him and I'm like, "Well, first things, sit up."
It's a stand up straight kind of thing.
Yeah, like sit up in your seat for God's sakes. And I said, "Okay, well, what do you wear to work right now?" And he kind of told me, and I'm like, "All right, well, what is the job that you want to go for? What are people wearing in that job?" And he's like, "Oh, well, they wear a suit and a tie and blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Then wear a suit and a tie. Like, always dress for the job you want, not the one you have,
Yeah.
in the corporate world, at least."
Yeah.
Um, and I said, and also try acting more like an adult.
Ah,
Like, it
did he
might
get
help
it?
you to not act like a skater boy. Like, if that's your vibe that you want to do when you're not at work, go for it.
Yeah.
Have fun with that. At work, that's not going to help you get where you say you want to go.
Yeah. And professional attire is evolving, but there are certain
Right.
basic rules, right? Like don't wear tennis shoes. Don't.
Well, unless you're on the West Coast and you're working in tech.
Yeah. And then they live there and they don't see the public anyway, so they could be naked for all we
Exactly.
know. Yeah. Yeah. I, I remember the first time I went to an event. I was the boss, and I went to a socializing event we had, and so I just wore my clothes that I wear out, and it blew their minds because I wasn't dressed, professionally. I'm putting air quotes around that, but that was my
Right.
value. Is I'm going to be the boss. I'm going to look like the man, the boss, right? So what I
Yeah.
wear out is not. It's two different wardrobes for me. Professional
Yeah.
clothes. It's my real clothes. It's because
Yeah.
that's the expectation, to be taken seriously.
Yeah. I mean, when I was practicing law, uh, I often didn't wear a suit to work. Unless I had to be in court, I didn't wear a suit. And I did that on purpose because my practice was mostly kind of meat and potato stuff, right? It was estate planning, bankruptcies, um, small business stuff, contract disputes, that kind of thing. But mostly kind of, the average person out in the world. I wasn't dealing with big business. I wasn't dealing with vast amounts of wealth from my clients. I was dealing with average people. And so knowing that it's already intimidating enough for folks to come in to talk to a lawyer, I wanted to create less barriers so that I could get more honest answers. So I tended to just wear like khakis and a shirt
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
Um, and it seemed to work really well. And it was a lot more comfortable for me.
Yeah. And it's 2023 now. If you are a trans masculine person and you're nervous about going into a men's clothing store and you've got the funds, I understand it's the funds, right? You can go to Stitch Fix,
Right.
you can shop online, right? I mean, there's
Yeah.
nothing that you can't buy on Amazon now that if it doesn't fit, you can't return it that day. Nobody cares, right? So,
Oh, and hell, if you do Prime, you can get it sent to you for free for 7 days.
yeah. And sometimes I've gotten things that night. I'm like, I didn't need a pair of pants within 5 hours, but great. Thank you. Thank you. Now I have them.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so but if you're going to go into a store, I remember the first time I started going into a men's clothing store, I was nervous as hell. And so I took a buddy with me, and nobody cared that two
Yeah.
dudes were shopping for a sport coat, right? And if they
Yeah.
had any feelings because they could tell we were trans, they kept it to themselves because strength in numbers. You can be rude to one person. Very
Right.
rarely will you be rude to two people. So
Exactly.
I never got any flack. I have childbearing hips. I have hips, and so when they had to do the measurements, all I said was, hey, I've got kind of a big butt and big hips, and the guy measuring was like, "You're average." I was like, "Oh, all right." He's like, "Yeah, you're average for your height."
Yeah.
So it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't scary. I had a buddy with me. Now I just kind of shop online. So there's
Yeah.
no fear that I have that I can't find something professional to wear now. That barrier seems to
Yeah.
be manageable for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Thankfully for me, I think I got over that really easily and early because I started shopping in the men's department when I was in high school. Um, because it just, those were the clothes that felt more authentic for me. And then when I was in law school, unfortunately, I went to law school in the 80s, which meant really bad suiting choices for quote unquote women.
Yeah.
Um, but at least I could get, like, I used to shop at Joseph A. Banks, which was great because their women's suits were cut almost the same as their men's suits, except that instead of trousers, you had a skirt. But it was
Gotcha.
like gray flannel.
Yes.
And then I wore men's wingtip shoes and like a standard blue cotton work, professional work shirt.
Yeah.
And I would wear suspenders so that I had suspenders on under my suit jacket, which nobody else would know, but I knew.
Love it.
So it was a
Love it.
little way for me to bring a piece of myself to this costume that I had to wear for work.
Yes. Yes. I love that. At 10 years later in the Navy, when I had to wear the women's uniforms, I always had boxers on underneath, even when I had to wear the skirt, because screw you, you're not going to get all of me. You're not going to humiliate
Right.
all of me. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
fun how
wore
we find little ways to subvert the the expectations or the expected requirements in
yeah,
order to find the things that can make you feel like you've got some voice in what's
yeah,
happening.
yeah. And it was always shoes and underwear for me. Right? Like
Yeah.
I have big feet, so I could shop in the women's shoes or the men's shoes, and so I would always say, well, the men's shoes fit better. Didn't I just like
I'll tell you a funny story about underwear. So when I was little, we used to travel back to Sweden like twice a year. And I remember being like maybe 5 or 6, and we were visiting my grandparents. And my cousin, who he's the closest in age to me. And so we hung out like all the time when we were kids. Um, he had underwear that were basically like tidy whitey, right? But they were in vibrant colors. And so there was, like the little uh, contrast stitching thing in the front panel so that you got like a, it looked like Y briefs basically, right? They made the same exact design for girls.
Oh.
So I made my mom buy me like 20 pairs of these things before we went home so that I could have essentially boys' underwear
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
when we got back to the States. And so every year that we went back to Sweden, I would buy my underwear there because they had underwear that looked like boys' underwear for me.
Don't tell me we don't know who we are at a very young age. Don't tell me. We know.
Oh, yeah.
We know.
No, we know.
Yeah.
And usually the people around us know too.
Yes. Yeah. I remember going shopping with my mom and JCPenney in 6th grade. So this was 1983, 84. And we were in the women's section, but it was the 80s, but there was this shirt that was a white collared shirt, and it had these pleats that started from the outside and went on the inside all the way down the length of the shirt. And it came with a leather tie. And it was like I had found the Holy Grail. But it was in the women's section, so I was like, Mom, can I have it? And I was over the top. I was over the moon. And so she bought it for me. And I never once wore it outside of the house. But I would go in my room and I would put that shirt and tie on and just walk into the bathroom to look at myself in the mirror and walk out and just back and forth. And I didn't
Wow,
even
but
know
you never
then.
wore it out.
I never wore it out because people always, you couldn't tell if I was a boy or a girl. And this really screwed with me as a kid. It really messed me up as a kid. I felt really insecure. I felt ugly. I thought I don't know how to be a girl right, which, spoiler alert, I don't. But at the time, it really, really messed me up. I was so insecure. I was so afraid of going out. And if I was out with my mom and they were like, oh, does he want something? I knew that she heard it. And the shame just smothered me. So I hated going out. I hated interacting with the public, especially if my mom was there or my brother was there or somebody was there, because it was so humiliating. Because I thought, I don't know how to, I'm an ugly girl. I don't know how to be a girl, right? I'm failing at this. So I didn't want to do anything that made that even harder to tell if I was a boy or a girl. But I wasn't willing to be girly because I hated dresses. I hated all that shit. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never wore the shirt and tie out, but I loved that. Oh my God, I loved it so much.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. So thank you, JC.
It's great that she bought it for you to give you that piece of affirmation,
Yes. Yeah. And she had to have known. And then a few years later, it became kind of trendy for girls to wear really big men's boxers as shorts. So they had their underwear on underneath. Yeah. But they just wore boxers as shorts. And so I was like, Mom, this is a thing. And so she did it. She did it again. Like, yeah. If she was alive, I would tell her it's her fault. I'm trans now because she bought me men's underwear. Yeah.
Well, but that's their fear, right? That's always the parental fear. Oh, it's my fault you turned out this way.
Yes. She had it for real.
And it's like,
she
no,
really, really
it's just luck of the draw.
She really thought it was her fault because my dad, who she was married to, smacked her around when she was pregnant with me, and she'd heard that a spike in adrenaline for the mom causes increased testosterone levels in the baby and makes them trans. So she thought it was her fault. Isn't that heartbreaking?
Where did that piece of nonsense come from?
The world. The world.
The ridiculousness that gets talked about.
And I have no idea how long she was carrying that around until she told me that. Because she told me that in like 2005? 2000. So I was a couple years into my transition. And she told me that. I'm like, no, Mom. You didn't. It's not your fault. Yeah. It's nobody's fault, moms. If you're listening, it's nobody's fault. It's nobody's fault.
And it's not a bad thing.
It's not. It's just a thing. It's just biological
It's just
diversity.
a thing.
It's just a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trans people are just as divinely created as cis people. It's just a fact. But
It's a fact. And as we've talked about, we struggle in many of the same ways as our cisgender counterparts.
absolutely. Absolutely. These are just
But hopefully, for those of you listening to the show today, you'll get the message that it's okay to talk about your feelings. It's okay to ask for help. Find other trans men in your life that you can connect with. I think certainly for me, the friendships that I have with other trans men are the most significant ones for me and have been for decades. To be able to talk to somebody who shares commonality in your path and in the kinds of challenges that we face that are unique is it's priceless.
yeah, there's a automatic understanding a little bit, right? I don't have to explain myself to a trans man. And
Right.
and I will say I pick quality people to be in my life. And those cis men who I've counted as close friends are quality people. I also don't really have to explain myself to them on a male level.
Right.
You know? So
Yeah.
surround yourself with quality people who
Yep.
who you can reach out to.
Quality over quantity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Give people a chance to believe in you and support you. And
Definitely.
hell, I'll do a plug. If you don't have anyone, I've had amazing success talking to Spencer. So give him a call, or give me a call, and we'll be your
Exactly. I mean, this is what we do is we do help people. So you can find me on Instagram at Daddy Spencer. You can find me on TikTok at Daddy Spencer. You can find me by email at daddyspencerb@gmail.com. You can find Drew.
Probably go to Instagram. It's Hey Uncle Drew. Hey_Uncle_Drew. But I think if you go to the This Effen Show on Instagram, you can also find that we're connected to that account too. So yeah, this is what
And
we
you
do.
can also just email us at This Effin' Show or drop us a line on Instagram and we'll get back to you.
Yeah. Let me just
Until
add
next time.
Yeah, let me add one
Yeah,
more
go
thing.
ahead.
Is something near and dear to my heart. And an institution we didn't talk about is accessing spiritual help. A lot of us feel like we can't go to
Absolutely.
church. A lot of us feel like we can't go to our pastors and our ministers. I like to think of myself as a spiritual help for those who can't go to church. So just throwing that out there.
Absolutely.
If that's one of your struggles, or one of the ways is places you're feeling disconnected. That's kind of my passion project. So.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Until next time, I'm Trans Dad.
I'm your Uncle Drew. Have a good day.
And we'll see you next time on
This Effin' Show.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of This Effin' Show. Do us a favor and give us a follow on Instagram and YouTube at This Effin' Show.
And you can email your comments or questions to us at thiseffinshow@gmail.com.
See you next time.